here is the topic at hand, or at least part of it. John, I did the best I could trying to get stuff off the web. My understanding is that this is the heart of the resolutions that we're trying to support here, and give a little bit of context and background too. So A111 is what you want to be thinking of. Essentially, it's a twofold. There's more to this resolution on economic justice that's being sponsored by the Episcopal Network for Economic Justice, but essentially the parts we want to give context for today are the fact that the Episcopal Church at all levels is being urged to commit from 1 to 10%. Some of us would be leaning very heavily on the 10 and beyond percent, to move investment capital into community investing. And the second aspect of this resolution is to try to build capacity for the Episcopal Economic Loan Fund. So there you see the small print, and what I want to do, what I've been asked to do by John and others in the network, is to give a little bit of a context for why we think this is extremely important and extremely strategic. So I'm going to skip the social analysis piece because I assume if you all sacrificed your lunchtime contemplation to come to this, you probably already know that we're in an economic crisis. And that the problems of wealth and poverty, both internationally and domestically, continue to be morally unacceptable, politically problematic, and ecologically unsustainable. I'm trying to bottom line it for you as much as I can. And what we want to talk about is how those of us who come from affluent homes, affluent churches, and affluent society handle our surplus, given the fact that we are dealing with what has recently been termed sort of a compulsive addictive disease called affluenza. So that's the context. You all know that we have a world of hurt going on at home and abroad. And the question is, how do we do something about it? Now, admittedly, those of you who are educators, and that would be most of you, will admit that it's very difficult to preach these things, to educate on these things when we're in the midst of a historic economic crisis, second only to the Great Depression, as Robert McIlvaine and others have pointed out. Millions of Americans, as you know, are wondering whether they will be able to obtain or retain a house, a job, or an education. As financial markets wobble and plummet, and homes are foreclosed, and great corporations are bailed out with public funds, our parishioners, and often our church leadership as well, are becoming increasingly anxious. Thanks. I don't have to bend down in front as well. With the collapse of the finance industry, the economy seems to have detonated. That's a sort of an appropriate play on words, lit by the fuse of adjustable rate mortgages, predatory lending, and usurious profiteering. But it seems that we provided ourselves as being a monotheistic culture. It seems that we really have been exposed as a money-theistic culture, and we have turned our affluence and our profiteering into an idol. But it turns out that mammon is a fairly severe god, and we're having to face that. Now, it turns out that there's some old wisdom in our tradition that addresses these sorts of issues. For example, there's an old biblical story that speaks to our condition. It's found in Numbers 11. You Episcopalians have never even cracked the book of Numbers, so let me just put it right up here for you. It's the old tale of God giving the people enough to eat in the wilderness. But what happens as soon as the gift is given is the people begin to eat compulsively, and they consume too much of the gift that God has given them. And so the old tale tells it that the people die of a plague, which is named Kibroth Hatava, or the graves of greed. Now, contemporary theologian Wendell Berry says it perhaps most succinctly. The great obstacle for us in our time is simply this: the conviction that we cannot change because we are dependent upon what is wrong. But he says that's the addict's excuse, and it will not do. So I think this is really pastorally, theologically, the situation that we are facing. Resolution A111 offers what we think is a very practical strategy for recovery from our addictive culture. It draws on the old wisdom of Scripture, and I want to remind us that Scripture is part of this conversation. The Numbers 11 text is a very different version of the story of the manna in the wilderness, which is found in Exodus 16. This is not primarily a feeding miracle, nor is it a morality tale about trust, as usually taught in our churches, but rather it's a didactic story about the importance of following instructions. The Hebrews have just been sprung from slavery in Egypt, and now they have to face the harsh realities of life outside the imperial system. Now these ancient Israelites, not unlike goes, because you learned it in Sunday school, they complain about being free from the Egyptian system, which proves the old African-American adage that it's easier to get the people out of Egypt than to get Egypt out of the people. The story then turns to illustrate Yahweh's alternative to the Egyptian economic cosmology. I will rain bread from heaven, says God. Now this, I want to suggest, is an ancient metaphor for the divine ecology of gift, as we see, for example, in Isaiah 55. The rain, the snow come down from heaven, and they don't return there until they have watered the earth, making it bring forth and sprout. The sun, the rain, the soil, and the seed are all gifts from God. Our job as human beings is simply to figure out how to gather the gift. But it's the instructions on how to gather the gift that are germane to Resolution A111. Exodus 16 is actually a test to see if Israel will follow on instructions so that they can move beyond their condition of slavery. In other words, friends, the first lesson of free Israel is a lesson in economics. And that's very important to us as church, which is a place still where economics is something that isn't easily spoken of. Here's the instructions. They're threefold. The first instruction is that every family is told to gather just enough. No one gathers too much, and no one